Titans making some significant additions, announcing some significant additions to their coaching staff, both new and old. Now, one small bit of just news, no opinion on this, but in case you have not heard, the Titans did announce earlier today that there will be a press conference held tomorrow, Wednesday, at 12:30, I believe. Is that right, JT? Off the top of my head?
I believe so, yep.
Yeah, 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time with head coach Brian Callahan, offensive coordinator Nick Holtz, and defensive coordinator Denard Wilson introducing Brian's two coordinators and talking through whatever questions we have for them. So we'll be looking forward to that, and I'm sure that will be a topic on Thursday's episode of the show. But as for the rest of the coaching staff, let's just run down the almost complete list that we have now, and then we'll talk a little bit about each one of these guys. So the Titans have announced most of their staff up until this point, today being Tuesday, February 13th. It's a pretty healthy mix, JT, of new faces and holdovers. So here's the complete list that we know of so far. We've got head coach Brian Callahan, who comes by way of Cincinnati. You now have assistant head coach Tom Jones, who comes by way of Las Vegas. Offensive coordinator Nick Holtz, who comes from Jacksonville. Defensive coordinator Denard Wilson, who comes from Baltimore. A holdover, assistant special teams coordinator Anthony Levine Sr. Now, you'll notice the Titans have not yet filled their third coordinator position. There is no special teams coordinator on the staff yet, but there is an assistant special teams coordinator who was previously employed under the Mike Vrabel regime, and that's Anthony Levine Sr. On the offensive side of the assistant tree here, you've got quarterbacks coach Bo Hardegree, who comes from Las Vegas, wide receiver coach Tyke Tolbert, who comes from Chicago, assistant wide receiver coach Peyton McCollum, who comes from Indianapolis, running back coach Randy Jordan, who comes from Washington, a holdover in tight end Justin Otten, who's been here with Tennessee for a couple of seasons, offensive line coach, you know him, Bill Callahan from Cleveland, and then three offensive assistants who all three were previously with the Titans before this season, Killian Butler, Matt Jones, and Luke Stalker. On the defensive side of the ball, you've got linebackers coach Frank Bush, who comes by way of Atlanta, outside linebacker coach Ben Bloom, who comes from Cleveland, defensive line coach Tracy Jackson, who comes from Philadelphia, Tracy Rocker. Yeah, that misprint there. Thank you for helping me on that, JT. Defensive line coach Tracy Rocker, who comes by way of Philadelphia, assistant defensive line coach and pass rush specialist, a holdover previously with the Titans, Clinton McMillan, safety and secondary coach Steve Jackson, who comes from Atlanta, cornerback and passing game coordinator Chris Harris, who was here with the Titans previously, working with the entire secondary, and finally, defensive quality control coach, also previously with the Titans, Lori Locust, the lone female on the staff. Now, a couple of tidbits on these guys that some of our colleagues and friends of the show have pointed out on Twitter already before we dive into some background on each of them. Our buddy Zach points out that McCollum, who is now the assistant, he is the assistant wide receiver coach, Peyton McCollum, coming from the Colts. He was a defensive assistant there, is now on the offensive side of the ball, former quarterback coach for the Washington Huskies, so has experience on both sides of the ball. He worked with Brian Callahan in Detroit when he was there working with Matt Stafford, and he was an offensive assistant who worked with the wide receivers at the time. Our buddy Mike Herndon points out that Tracy Rocker, the new defensive line coach, is a big get in his opinion. Rocker is coming over from Philadelphia, where he worked alongside the new Titans defensive coordinator Denard Wilson in 2021 and 2022. He also spent time with the Titans organization in the past from 2011 to 2013, and he oversaw the development of one young Jarrell Casey. Now, before I dive into some background on each of these guys, and we can kind of talk through our preliminary thoughts, JT, anything in the comments? I don't want to neglect our friends in the comments. What did they think so far of these coaching hires?
Yeah, not too much in here except Kenneth, who says and agrees with Mike that Tracy Rocker, it feels like the biggest get. And I think we can start there on him because I think out of all of these that we saw today, he is the biggest one. He definitely fills a hole that Coach T leaves behind on the defensive line there. And coming from a team who just like in the past couple of seasons just has repeatedly churned out really good defensive linemen, and that defensive front seven has always been really good. Having a chance to reunite him with Denard Wilson and get him in the building here and be able to kind of work with Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons and Arden Key and a lot of these guys that are on this team, and probably they will draft in this upcoming draft and also beyond. It's very exciting to see him in the building.
And Rocker, who is a 32-year coaching veteran, he's been coaching for a couple of years longer than you and I both have been alive. He continued, there are a couple of these guys that were announced for the first time today, continues this trend with the Titans staff where a lot of the guys at the top of the totem pole, Brian Callahan, Denard Wilson, Nick Holtz, Colts, Ran Carthon for his part. They're younger, innovative minds. They have experience. They all have experience, but they're not the old heads who've been around for decades and decades. A lot of the assistant coaches under them are those guys. And I think that's a pretty valuable way to structure your coaching staff. You need experience somewhere. And while you're getting kind of the best of both worlds, where the guys at the top of the totem pole are those forward-thinking, fresh minds, young guys who are going to push the envelope and take you into the future, you also have that firm bedrock, that base of experience, of knowledge, of NFL acumen in the guys that are working with and under them, to mentor them on certain things, to provide insight and perspective on certain things, to be able to be, left to their devices with their position group. And you trust, hey, man, he's been doing this for 30 plus years. I don't have to look over his shoulder and micromanage. He's good. He's got it. Right. And I'm not saying that you should be hiring anybody you feel that way about, but there's a certain level of comfort, I think, when you're a first-time head coach, especially, to let, a guy, Bill Callahan, Tracy Rocker, defensive line, offensive line, those coaches have been doing this for a long, long time. I trust that they know what they're doing and don't need any supervision. They're good. I can focus on the things that are most important to me. But we can start with Rocker. A couple of things from his background, of course, with the Eagles in 21 and 22, got to a Super Bowl with them. They were the second-ranked total defense when they got to the Super Bowl, 301.5 total yards per game allowed, tied for the third most sacks in NFL history, tied with 70 sacks that year. They also became the first team in NFL history to have 4 different players with double-digit sacks in the same season. He has been around the block, obviously, in 32 years, including stints at South Carolina, the University of Tennessee, and University of Georgia. 24 years as a collegiate coaching, in a collegiate coaching career. He had stops at his alma mater in Auburn, Mississippi, Arkansas, Cincinnati, Troy State, West Alabama. He's also mentored a number of NFL draft picks, including 6 All-Americans and 2 National Award winners. He got his first gig in the NFL with the Titans in 2011 through 2013. Those years, Tennessee produced the 10th most sacks in the league, and you had guys like Derek Morgan, who had a breakout year, had 59 tackles and 23 hits with 6.5 sacks. Carl Klug was on the team, a young player who ranked first among rookie defensive tackles and sacks that year. And then, of course, young defensive end Jarrell Casey, who registered the most tackles, 74, by any Titans defensive lineman that season. So he has got a really deep and diverse resume, really lengthy trip around the world, on a trip around the U.S., honestly, as a coach in numerous different defensive capacities. Tom Jones, we can touch on real quick. He is the first, maybe the only, but the first assistant head coach named to be working under Brian Callahan. Assistant head coach is a position that I think a lot of people look at and they're like, okay, it's, what exactly does that mean? What is that? And I'm sure they mean different things in different organizations, but in general, an assistant head coach is a guy that you can delegate to. He is a guy that you can trust to handle, week to week, day to day operational things, and be the leader in the room in your stead. So that's an important person to have in your corner. Tom Jones, he joins the Titans after spending 25 years with the Oakland and then Las Vegas Raiders. His final 2 seasons with the Raiders were as vice president of football operations and assistant to the head coach. So he's got experience at this level. He joined the Raiders as an intern in 96. So he was with them forever. So he's a guy that has a lot of experience out west. Let's see,
probably
Ben
some
Bloom.
Connections with Bill Callahan when he probably was on staff and coaching them as well, I believe.
It has to be, because he was there the whole time.
Eras.
Yeah, has to be. Yeah, definitely.
So that's also one where sorry to interrupt, but where you look into that and say that you see this kind of the web of what Callahan's strings right here is who you know and who you've worked with, and who you may not be bringing in some of these coaches who are in these positional groups who are at the fitting edge, but you've seen their work and you've seen how they've been able to do it before, and that's going to work within your system as well.
Yeah, and that's going to be a recurring theme as we go through the background on some of these guys, because there is this web of past connections and crossing paths and working together and all of those things. The next guy that we heard about for the first time today is Ben Bloom, the outside linebackers coach. He was with Cleveland the past 4 seasons, entering now his 15th season as a coach in the NFL. He did a couple of things on both sides of the ball in Cleveland. He was the run game coordinator at one point and then transitioned to the defensive line coach last season. Of course, oversaw a couple of pretty good players up there. Myles Garrett, 2023 Defensive Player of the Year, is chief amongst them. He went to Cleveland after spending about a decade in Dallas, working with the linebackers there. So a lot of defensive and linebacking experience in his past. He was an assistant head coach and special projects coordinator with Dallas, defensive ends with Dallas, assistant defensive line and defensive ends with Dallas, defensive quality control and assistant linebackers with Dallas. Ton of that front on the defense experience for Ben Bloom, who's going to be overseeing the Titans outside linebackers. Let's see who else. We knew about Steve Jackson, who's the secondary and safeties coach, but I don't think we've touched much on his background at all. Just a real quick refresher for anybody that wants to know a thing or two about Steve Jackson, who's going to be in charge of what needs to be a serious renovation project for the Titans and their secondary. You know what, Steve? One could argue the only way you have to go is up. Rock bottom seems to be where the Titans are. I would advise you not to establish a new definition of rock bottom, because that would be both impressive and difficult. He spent 2 seasons with the Falcons before he came and joined the Titans this offseason. Former Houston Oilers draft pick, played 9 seasons for the Titans, and he's now entering his 21st season coaching the NFL. So he's an NFL lifer, obviously. He was the senior offensive assistant with the Falcons when he joined in 22 and then went to coaching last season. He was the secondary and cornerbacks coach for the Bengals in 20 and 21. Just some of his squad's performance under Jackson's guidance. Cincinnati's defensive backs limited opposing quarterbacks to 74.9 passer rating over their 4-game postseason run when they went to the Super Bowl, obviously. Prior to being in Cincinnati, he spent 2 seasons with the Jets, also doing a defensive back coaching, and was with the Titans coaching in 16 and 17, actually. Did 2 seasons as the assistant secondary coach for the Titans. He was here at the beginning of Kevin Byard's career, when Kevin Byard had his career high 8 interception season, tied for the most in the NFL that season. So he has been around the ball. Just going to keep trucking through these for folks that are interested on all these guys. Frank Bush, linebackers coach. He is again, this theme of guys with a ton of experience. It's not really surprising, JT, because we knew when Brian Callahan was hired, this guy's got a deep Rolodex. He's an NFL lifer. He's going to be able to bring in coaches that are not just some of the best at what they do, but have been around the block, have done a thing or two, have worked with his dad back in the day, and grew up knowing him as a kid and a teenager, and now as a coach, and respects him and wants to go work with him and his dad. And Frank Bush, I think, absolutely fits that bill. 32-year NFL veteran in the coaching ranks. He was also a former Houston Oilers draft pick, so familiar with the organization. He spent the last 3 seasons also in Atlanta as a linebackers coach. He was with the Jets before that. So interesting how Frank Bush and Steve Jackson's careers have lined up. Those two must work pretty well together on the defensive side of the ball. He was with the Dolphins before that, the Rams before that. There's a lot of, I won't bore you with all of the information here, but he was with the Titans organization previously as a coach, again in 11 and 12, a linebackers coach then. Before his stint in Tennessee, he spent 4 seasons with the Texans, and the first 2 as a defensive senior assistant, working with the defensive line and doing a lot of awesome things, where you saw Mario Williams and D'Amico Ryans as a player, and Brian Cushing. All of those guys were Pro Bowl players under his tutelage in Houston. Just making sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, so that's Frank Bush. Peyton McCollum, a new name today. He is the assistant wide receivers coach, and we can spend an actual moment on him and what I think bringing him in is going to mean for the Titans. Now, this is a hire from, in division, so it's somebody that the Titans are familiar with his work, obviously, intimately familiar with his work. He was a defensive assistant, though, for the Colts, so he's jumping to the other side of the ball now. He brings 9 years of coaching experience, including 3 in the NFL, so this will be his 10th year as a professional or collegiate football coach. He was an offensive analyst with Eastern Michigan before he joined the Colts staff, so he was back on the offensive side of the ball then. He spent 2 seasons with the University of Washington in 20 and 21 as the quarterbacks coach, so this is a guy that clearly is just respected as a coach in general, not for his acumen in one specific sector of the staff, or one of the roster, rather. He was the wide receivers coach at North Carolina Central University back in 2019. And so this guy is the opposite of what we've been talking about with these old heads, these guys that have been around the block 2-3 decades. Clearly, he has risen up the quarterback ranks pretty rapidly. And you could look at, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you're like, oh, this guy, he doesn't have a ton of experience. Like, what's the track record on him? If you go from in 2019 working as a wide receivers coach at North Carolina Central University to being a position coach in the NFL and being hired and rehired year over year, clearly you're a guy that has some real prowess. It has some real staying power with people that are above you, and they want to hire you away and they want you on their staff. And so I think that he is an exciting hire for the Titans for that reason. Who else should we talk about here? Bo Hardegree, we've kind of talked about, coming from Vegas. He's going to be the quarterbacks coach. He's going to work intimately with Will Levis, so we've already brushed up on him. Randy Jordan is a guy that I think people find interesting. He's one of the coaching hires, and again, people just say things based on like the bare minimum information on these coaches. You look at Randy Jordan, who's a running backs coach coming from working the same job in Washington Washington the past couple of seasons. He's a former running back himself. Folks look at what he did in Washington and say, what? Like, okay, Brian, why am I blanking on his name? Brian Robinson Jr., Gibson. Like, what exactly did he do with those guys that is anything to write home about? I don't know what your opinion is on this, JT. I kind of feel like when you're working with as abysmal an offensive line group as they had in Washington, as well as like two running backs that are fine, but they're not, I don't regard them as top half of the league. I think that he did a fine job with them.
I think he did. He obviously has done well enough to be there for 9 years. I believe he started in 2014, did he not? And now he's leaving to join Tennessee in 2024. So almost a decade spent with the Washington Commanders and that franchise. I believe that if my knowledge serves me well, I believe that's also during the Alfred Morris, or like right on the heels of Alfred Morris and his breakout season. But also I think to your point about Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, it's a lot of
Robinson had 1,000 yards from scrimmage this year, by the way.
Brian Robinson was one of the more efficient runners this season. For a guy who last season is his second year, had a rough start to his rookie season, getting shot in the leg, but then was
shot in the leg.
But then was able to also perform in his first season. And then last year, like you said, over 1,000 rushing yards. Obviously, he's been doing this a long time, and he's been doing it well enough that an NFL team, one of 32 positions that he could have in that spot, have kept him around for nearly a decade. So at least I think he's done at least something correct.
You want one random thing on Randy Johnson that is just specifically tailored to you?
Sure.
When he was working in the college ranks in 2011 with UNC, he helped a running back on that team lead the ACC in rushing yards with 1,228. Can you tell me who that running back is? He's a Bengals legend, and he's a lesser known running back from recent years.
I want to say, is it Jeremy Hill?
No, it's Giovanni Bernard.
Giovanni was my other one. When you said, I was gonna say Gio, but then when you said lesser known, I said, oh, okay, maybe it's not Gio.
I'm sorry, did I put some disrespect on Gio's name?
I feel like Giovanni Bernard is
moderately known.
I feel like he is.
How many people, if you ask him on the street today, who is Giovanni Bernard and where does he play, would be able to get either question
NFL
correct.
Fans or random people?
No, NFL
fans. I feel like
I'm a pretty big NFL watcher. I couldn't tell you for certain right now where he plays. I think I know, but I'm not sure.
Giovanni's retired, bro. Retired.
Okay, that's my point, bro. That's my point. Like, I don't think
Super Bowl
everybody
champion with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, man.
Okay, so that's I knew he was bouncing around. I didn't know if he stopped or not. Okay, all right.
No, but that makes sense. I mean, he's been around a lot of good talent, I feel like, and
he's never been the alpha in the NFL, but he's been a great too. Anyways, this is not the Giovanni Bernard podcast. We do have other things to talk about. That's pretty much everybody. Of course, I won't go through. We've talked about Bill Callahan. You know the skinny on him. So that is about 30 minutes there.